Hello, movie lovers. Welcome home. My name is Amy Henserling, and you are listening to Watch This List, a podcast aimed at getting your film world down to a more manageable size. Today, I am joined with friend and fellow podcaster, Marc Dottavio, long A, not short A.
You got it.
Who is the co-host of his show Unwatchables. And he's dropped in today to discuss a rather controversial, potentially, topic of sequels that are greater than the originals. Marc, what's up? How you feeling?
I am so excited to be here, Amy. And ever since we first had you on Unwatchables, and you are our first Letterboxd friend that we met by doing in person the podcast. And we managed to find some movies that didn't totally freak you out too much because we do talk about films that they could be disturbing, they could be graphic, they could just be difficult or misunderstood, anything that could possibly in one way or another be considered unwatchable. And we had you on to talk about Possession, which you were on the watchable side of.
Firmly on the 5-star watchable side, and then the other one shall not be named or discussed ever again.
Yes, and definitely not watched.
Definitely not watched or rewatched.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, it really feels like I'm coming full circle here now. You were on my podcast, now I'm on your podcast, and we've come a long way.
And I have a podcast because of your podcast, more or less. The inception of my idea came after Mark and Seth and Tony so graciously had me on. So yes, this feels like a special episode to have you here with me, and I appreciate it.
Oh, I'm honored, and it really feels good to hear that these little things, like this are coming off. Because I mean, you didn't need us to, help you do a podcast, but if there was any small part that helped us, give you the confidence or inspire you to, that, hey, if these idiots can do it, then I probably can.
Yeah. If Seth can do it, I can do it. That's really my takeaway.
And it meant a lot of things in life. That's what I turn to.
Yes, exactly. Now, for Mark, I typically ask, or I have done this so far, had the guest choose what their topic was, and Mark you came out that pretty quickly, where you were like, oh, I want to do sequels. Like, you want to talk about sequels. So what gave you that kind of verve for it? And then what is your criteria for this subject specifically?
Well, it's something that I thought about a lot just over the years. And it's always fun just to kind of, I like to make lists and think about like, oh, what really are the best sequels? And is it actually better than the original? Is there an argument for that? Do I agree with what the main ones that get cited usually are? And just the more I thought of it, the more that certain ones started to stick out. And I guess I just wanted to figure it out, like, finally. And this is definitely this is my like final list. This is what I think actually are the 5 best. And there's a lot of choices out there, so I did want to narrow it down with some criteria. The biggest thing here is that I do want to make sure that it is something that is better than the first movie. And that actually, for me, rules out a lot of famous and really good sequels that I think are really good movies, or especially excellent as sequels. But if they don't go above and beyond the first movie, I kind of ruled that out. So that's where a lot of the ones that people are maybe expecting to hear are going to go by the wayside. I think the 2 that probably get picked out the most are The Godfather Part 2 and Terminator 2, Judgment Day. And those are both movies I like, that I think are overachieving as far as sequels go, and they're very good. But I do not think Godfather 2 is anywhere near as good as the first one. And I think that Terminator 2 maybe comes closer, but I still prefer the James Cameron's original, the more kind of compact, gritty thriller, almost horror movie. And the way it introduces all the different elements, I do give that a slight edge. So that's why those movies aren't on here. I mean, there's a couple other ones that were really notable, like Dawn of the Dead, the sequel to Night of the Living Dead, I think is excellent.
Mm-hmm.
Technically one of the best sequels, but I don't think that it hits that level that Night of the Living Dead does. Same thing with, say like Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2, excellent. I'm not quite sure. I think it's better than the first one. And Bride of Frankenstein was another one that I was thinking of.
Yes.
Which is very interesting and diametrically opposed to the original, but I'm always going to pick the originals in those cases. I am curious. I know that there is a really popular sequel that you don't like. That's kind of an unpopular opinion. And I would love to get that out in the open too, so I can activate my Twitter army against you.
Mark, I told Mark that I had such a film and was going to save it to the end so that people didn't automatically shut this down.
Oh, well, we could wait if you want to.
No.
All right.
Let's get it out. I'll feel better. It's like a weight on my shoulders, this movie. And I always am prepared to bring it out in case somebody just happens to mention it. But those of you out there who I really value your ears right now, but if you think that Aliens is superior to Alien, you are woefully mistaken, my friend. And we need to go to dinner together so that I can change your mind.
All right. So I actually agree with you. I don't. Yeah,
Do you?
But here's the thing. I think I'm getting the vibe that you really dislike Aliens. Okay.
Yes.
That's where I do like the movie, and I think it is a very good sequel. However, I do think that it is crazy to think that it's better than the original Alien.
If it weren't a sequel to Alien, I might enjoy the movie. But the fact that it's put even in the same like stratosphere as Alien is what has made me so angry. And then that anger has like accumulated over time until now I have this rage, that like Fury Road rage, where I'm just like down with Aliens because there's people who exist who think this is better, like literally think. And it's like a goofball, silly thing with Bill Paxton.
Yeah, it is. It's a goofy action movie, and I do think that it's fun on its own terms, and probably better to take things in a totally different direction than to try and replicate the greatness of the first movie. However, yeah, the first is like a horror sci-fi, just stone cold classic, and
masterpiece.
Yeah, it's like perfect.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
Yeah, to say that the other one is better, it's definitely bigger and more, and sometimes that's a good strategy. Sometimes it's not, but we'll get into that when we get into my picks. But yeah, we're definitely in agreement on that. So
Aliens, don't talk to me about Aliens as being superior, or I will lose my sanity and not be able to speak.
You heard it here. Everyone, lay off.
Don't mention this to me ever. And with that, we're gonna dive in here.
Well, before, just real quick, I have other factors just so everybody knows that these I am only considering direct sequels as well. So if you kind of have these standalone series like James Bond movies, the Pink Panther movies, stuff like that, I've tried not to go into those. Anything where it's kind of arguable whether it counts as a sequel. I also I tried to go with picks where the original is at least something that is good, that maybe not great. And I do violate my own rule a little bit. We'll get into that. But just to help narrow it down. So like, I'm not a big fan of the original Exorcist. I enjoy Exorcist 3 a lot more. There's lots of horror movies that kind of start out in a cheap, like not very interesting place and have lots of sequels. And then one eventually ends up being pretty good. Or like Fast Five, some of the later Fast and the Furious movies. But I wanted there to be a little bit more of a hurdle to pass as far as being better than the original.
Okay, so Mark's criteria is basically the second movie has to be literally superior in your mind, because otherwise it's not just like this was a great second feature. It has to be greater than.
Yeah, for the best of the best, I think that's the best way to narrow it down.
So with that, keeping that in mind, that way we don't get a lot of hatred for not having certain things. Mark is slyly trying to insulate himself from ridicule and rejection.
Send all your hate mail to Amy and the podcast. I will not be accepting.
Yes. Mark is not available for comment, and he hopes that you agree with him after you hear this episode with the two of us explaining why his top 5 are the actual best sequels ever made.
You will agree. It'll be inarguable. Don't worry.
Yeah. So we're going to start with Mark's number 5 pick. A very interesting one that I had not personally seen. The French Connection 2. Actually, there's no the. French Connection 2.
There you go.
Directed by John Frankenheimer instead of the OG William Friedkin. Mark, tell us what you like in comparison to the first one, what you think it does better, but then also I'm interested in your view about the directorial influence as well, since these are actually 2 different directors.
Sure, yeah. And there's a good mix of movies that are by the original director and that aren't by the original director on this list.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm well aware that this is definitely the least well-known and least loved of all the movies on this list. I think that there might be a lot of people who either haven't seen or even heard of French Connection 2. And certainly a lot that would disagree that it's better than the original. But I do think that it is. And part of that has to do with me not thinking the original is that great. I do think that it's a good movie. I think it's a little overrated. On the plus side, there's a lot of New York flavor from the 70s. It's a very dry procedural, but still a pretty engaging one. But the best thing by far is this famous car chase that's in it. That is just this insanely thrilling sequence that I do think is like a classic scene. But the movie as a whole, the characters seem to kind of barely exist. I know Gene Hackman is recognizable from it, but Popeye Doyle to me is more of like a cool name than a person that we get much of a sense of. He seems kind of generic, and other people in the movie seem to barely exist, like Roy Scheider. He's just there as a face. He doesn't seem to do much of anything. And it has this really downbeat, unresolved, like 70s ending that doesn't really feel earned to me, or like it's going for something profound that doesn't quite land. So it's something that I generally like, but I'm just not crazy about it. And in this case, for the sequel, we are switching from William Friedkin to John Frankenheimer, who is a director I definitely prefer. In movies like Seconds, The Manchurian Candidate, The Train, these are all my kind of like action thrillers or dark, I don't know, whatever you call Seconds, I don't even know. But, and, I mentioned earlier that I preferred The Exorcist 3 to the original. So a lot of this might come from that I'm just not that crazy about William Friedkin in general. I can't really think of a movie of his I'm wild about. I haven't seen Sorcerer in a long time. I do remember really liking it. But I think Frankenheimer's approach is more my speed. And the movie as a whole has so many more elements to it that kind of fixes things that I was underwhelmed by in the original. And the first is the change of setting. So Popeye Doyle, played by Gene Hackman, now, instead of being in New York the whole time, is this like fish out of water in Marseille. And this language barrier, it kind of forces him to distinguish himself as a character, that we have to follow him along and see him challenged and grappling with these things. And the first like third of this movie is just Gene Hackman being really ornery and goofing around with, locals. There's lots of unsubtitled French. He just doesn't understand anything they say. They don't understand anything he's saying. He kind of, messes with them a little bit. And, there's some kind of awkward like humor and some clunky dialogue in this early part that I could see people watching this and thinking like, oh, this is just a betrayal of the original. This is getting like a little too goofy.
Well, and that was Ebert's stance. He did not like French Connection 2, partly because what you just said, that he's in France instead of New York. So there's this feeling of like he was the king in New York and he knew, it was his turf. And then you're throwing like this great cocky police detective into a place where he doesn't even know the language. He's fumbling around. He's making a fool of himself. Ebert really disliked the vibe that you, I think, appreciated as well as I did. And in addition to that, it's, completely different in tone because of the location. So his whole attitude and everything is just like displacement as opposed to, rule, like being a dictator almost of his area.
Sure. And, just you describing it like that sounds great to me. That sounds so much more
Me
interesting.
too. Yeah, he was not a fan. He was like, I don't want to see this guy in this setting. Like, I don't want to see like people taking advantage of him I think there was even a sentence where he didn't like that when he was trying to order scotch that the waiter was just like, what? And there was like this whole exchange where he was just trying to order a drink and the guy didn't understand him. Ebert just thought that was so embarrassing, so humiliating to like the great Popeye Doyle Oscar,
Yeah, see, so
winner.
if you're not getting much out of that character from the first movie, then this is only a step up. For me, it makes the dynamic a lot more interesting and less generic than it was. And a lot of the things that the movie does, I think, forces him to kind of come out of his shell and challenge him in a way the first movie never does, and gives Gene Hackman an opportunity to act. Like he really is fantastic in this and goes into these depths that the first one doesn't even hint at. And I think this is really overlooked performance just by him in his career, and should deserve a lot more credit for that. And if nothing else, if you're a fan of Gene Hackman, now that he's retired, we have this finite number of movies that he's in. And I think he does some of his best work in this movie and in this sequence in particular.
And he actually said that. And I saw an interview where he said that he thinks that the best acting he's ever done was in French Connection 2.
Oh, nice.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, we're agreed then.
So, Mark, you agree with Hackman, with the person who is in it. So, and very interestingly that he would say that when he won the Oscar for the first one. So this is very multi-layered and I think very rewarding if you can kind of divorce your idea of just being purely action driven and kind of go into a mental expectation of a character study more so, then I think you'll get a lot more out of it. Because if you expect something that's too similar, then you will be let down when it's unnecessary to be let down by this, because it is very good in its own right.
Definitely. It's a messier, more kind of sprawling movie that, again, does have some awkward parts in it. And there's not a single like set piece that I think is as like explosive as the car chase in the first one. But it does eventually, when he gets his bearings back, become a pretty good action movie where, he's like, he just goes in and burns down a building in front of everybody to get to flush out this guy he needs to talk to. There's this massive flood around like a docked boat that they're swimming through. And I won't spoil the last scene of this, but there's just this excruciatingly long like foot chase that goes through the last part of this movie. And the way that it ends with this like door slam to black, I literally like leapt out of my seat, like, gah! And it got me.
There's a lot of running.
Yeah.
I was like, Gene Hackman can move around. He can get from one place to the other. Like he's in shape. And this is 70s, he's at kind of the height there. I think somebody had told me that Friedkin denounced the existence of the sequel and, just wouldn't acknowledge that it even existed. So I do have to say, I think it's ridiculous that he said that, because he made Sorcerer based on Wages of Fear and literally made his own sequel to an original that was like very different in nature, even though they have similar plots. So whatever, Friedkin.
Just jealous.
Like, get over yourself.
No one wants to see a better sequel in their movie that they didn't make.
Good point. Yeah, good point. So he's a little salty. Yeah, that's okay.
That's fine.
Yeah. Okay, so French Connection 2, which is not streaming. I did rent it on Amazon. I always am going to tell you guys where to get these legally. So if you have other means, whatever, but I'm going to tell you it's on Amazon. Okay, so number 4, Mark, why don't you tell us what your number 4 is? Because I think you can say it with more. I like the idea of a male saying
Oh,
this
right.
one.
Well, this is Mad Max Fury Road. I hope I did that good enough.
Yeah. That was great. That was great. So Mad Max Fury Road, I, in preparation for this, only watched that one, but Mark actually watched all the Mad Max films recently.
Yes, revisited the whole series just so I could be sure, because I take this very seriously.
Okay, can you tell me how it compares? Because there are several.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And, before this movie came out, which, of course, the series started in, I think, well, this is definitely like the longest between entries of anything on this list. So it was 30 years since part 3, Beyond Thunderdome, and 36 years since the first Mad Max movie came out. And they are all done by the same director, George Miller, which means he was 70 when he made Fury Road.
And is 77 now
Yes.
going to make, another entry. So he's just a madman.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. The fact that this this guy who is so old made a movie this insane and this like high octane that late in his life, and I think he's one of only 2 directors on this list who made the sequel that I think is better than the original. So like he directed the whole series, and until Fury Road came out, I think that part 2, The Road Warrior, was considered to be one of the best sequels ever made. Because the original Mad Max, there's really not much to it. The post-apocalypse setting is not very developed. There's not that many car chases. It's kind of this awkward revenge / origin story for a character who I don't really think needs one. And it's not until part 2, The Road Warrior, where you really get this George Miller flavor, this gonzo set design, these bad guys who are all like mohawks and assless chaps, and this bad guy, this lead villain, who's basically like a leather daddy Jason Voorhees. And, I don't know who comes up with stuff like that. But, the world building is so much more involved, where they're, using gas like currency. There's lots of dark humor and really great, like massive car chase at the end, which is similar to what we see throughout Fury Road. So that is a movie that I like. Beyond Thunderdome, the third and last entry until Fury Road came out 30 years later, I think has a really strong first 45 minutes where Max is going into Bartertown, and there's very little action, actually. It's just all this kind of insane imagery and building this world out. And the rest of the movie kind of devolves into this almost like Steven Spielberg type family thing where there's kids, like Lost Boy type people. Like, I think kind of foretells George Miller, doing family films in the interim, because he did Babe, Pig in the City. He did both of the Happy Feet movies in that long 30 years before he came back to Mad Max. And Fury Road, then, to me, is just the unlikeliest thing, besides that it had been so long, that he was so old, that now we're in 2015 when, the Marvel movies were kind of, I think, starting around their second phase or so, and really unique action blockbusters like this were just not happening in the theaters, and they pretty much don't even exist anymore. We might get like 1 or 2 these days that people get excited about. But so the fact that it came out in that atmosphere and then ended up being, in my opinion, the best action film of the 2010s, and I think maybe it's on the list there of the best ever made, as far as I'm concerned, because it takes all of the little best things from each movie and puts them all into this one package. And I think the most notable thing that it does is, it switches out Mel Gibson for Tom Hardy, but it also kind of marginalizes the character. He's really playing more of like a supporting role in this. And I think it results in the best story that he ever told in this series. And you have these great characters like Imperator Furiosa, played by Charlize Theron, and Nux, who's this war boy, played by Nicholas Holt, who is trying to go to Valhalla by fighting for the evil villain Immortan Joe. And it turns out into a story that I found to be really affecting and moving, actually, especially the stuff with the war boy who kind of has his dreams of Valhalla taken away from him, and he ends up on the good guys' side and making this big sacrifice for them. I don't know. I was surprised by how like emotionally involved I got in this watching it again.
Yeah. I think it achieves a level that's just, if you are cinematically minded, or however you want to say, if you're focused on like, oh, look at that cool production design, like how did they light this? Like if you're looking at it in that way, it's just quite a spectacle just of its own merit. Like not even talking about the narrative itself, just like taking it in, and that they use so many practical effects. They tried to do as much as they could realistically, which shows, I think. So it's not just all CGI and doctored up. It's like some of these cars are actually exploding. Like these are cars. Like some of it's just really on another level technically too.
Yeah, everything about it. I mean, the editing, the way that all of these chases are staged and paced. George Miller is just really brilliant at doing that. And like when he's on fire and given the resources to do this, which is basically like a feature length car chase, there's little breaks, but things start off, right away with Charlize Theron's character kind of going rogue in this four-wheeler or whatever it is, and to rescue these brides of the villain. It just, from there, that there's such this sense of just like controlled chaos, and everything you see is very clear, but it's chaotic and electrifying, and the whole movie feels so epic to me that there's so many different stages they go along, and there's such a strong story, and the set pieces keep building on top of one another, and it's so exhilarating
and moving. Like you said, it is a little bit. I thought that part of it would hit me as being like, oh, it's kind of simplistic. We're talking about redemption, and we're talking about like, basic things that so many movies are built on, but it actually does kind of hit you where you're like, oh, you're kind of moved by it, even though it's themes that you've seen before time and time again. So there is something to say about that, making it feel fresh.
Yeah, it's pitched at such a operatic level that it's hard not to get swept up in it, even though you're right, it's kind of a familiar, story about the bad guy turning good and the mercenary learning to, care about the people that he's helping, and, them coming together. But that kind of archetypal stuff, I think, works really great in this context because the world is so bizarre and the art direction is so bonkers. It's like the villain, I think, is the best villain of the series, this Immortan Joe, because there's this really personal thing going on with him trying to get his brides back. And we just have all these little details, like Max himself serves as a blood bag. That's like basically like he's hooked up to another guy to provide him with strong blood. And they use this silver mouth spray that kind of gets them all geared up like an amphetamine or something. And they have to keep adding gas to the cars while they're racing by like spitting it in. Just so many details like that. The crazy guitar shredder guy who's playing like heavy metal as they're driving around. It's crazy. And the fact that this exists is ridiculous.
And it's visceral. It's very physical. Like everything you just described is like it's dealing with saliva and blood, and like it feels very like it's coming out of their own bodies. So it's like it's not just external. There's a lot of internal stuff kind of subtly going on underneath the surface coming out.
Yeah.
It's wild.
It is a journey.
Yes. So I'm sure that most people have seen this, but rewatch it. It's good. It's not as impactful, I think, probably on the big screen. I don't know, Mark, if you saw it like in IMAX or anything, if that had been at the time.
Oh,
But
I wish. Saw it in a regular movie screen.
yeah, it's still really good. I watched it at home. It's on HBO Max, and it's still gorgeous to watch it even as a rental.
Oh, it looks
So,
incredible.
Check it out. So next on the list of Mark's top 5 favorite sequels, we have number 3, which is a movie that I ended up loving ridiculously, Magic Mike XXL. I almost want to
same
say
year as Fury Road.
Is it?
Yeah, both 2015.
And both on HBO Max, oddly enough.
Yeah, that's our official sponsor for today.
Yeah, shout out to HBO. Yeah, Mark, tell us the difference, the tonal difference between the two movies, and also what you loved most about XXL versus just Soderbergh's directorial contribution.
Yeah, this is the one that kind of breaks my rule about liking the original, because I definitely like Magic Mike the least of any of the originals that we're talking about here. I think that it's a movie that has a lot of promise in it, and there's some aspects of it that this is able to expand on in a positive way, that you still get a sense of that we're, celebrating female desire and the male body, and things that you just never see as in that same presented in that same way in mainstream movies. And you do get some of that from the original. And, Channing Tatum still can just rocks it out in the different routines and stuff that he does. And Steven Soderbergh is definitely, a very accomplished director. So the movie looks great. However, there's a lot of it that gets bogged down in kind of a typical showbiz rise and fall, where, you have the up and coming newcomer that Channing Tatum mentors, and he goes into this drug fueled downward spiral. And, there's a kind of pretty tepid romance that's at the center of things. And this sequel, we do lose Soderbergh, and we do lose Matthew McConaughey, who is a pretty memorable character in the first film. However, we also lose the kid played by Alex Pettyfer, who doesn't end up having that much of a role or anything to do in the original. We lose all the drug stuff. There's a romance here that I still don't get much out of, but it resolves in a way better way than the original romance does. And it basically doubles down on all of the stuff that is great about the original. Now, the writer of the original also wrote the sequel, but it does have a different director. I believe Soderbergh still helped. He might have edited it or done the lighting or something.
He did the cinematography and the editing.
Okay. And that's the kind of stuff he loves to do. He's always been really interested in doing all that stuff himself.
And it has that look. It has kind of a Fincher look with the yellow tinting, and it's kind of dark in places that you wouldn't expect. So you can definitely see that influence there.
Right. So there still is some of that touch, but now all of that stuff is it's almost like the first movie has this underlying like conservatism to it, because in the end these characters are like punished for this hedonistic lifestyle, and it's like this cautionary tale. And Magic Mike XXL is all about the joyousness and the celebration and the positivity. And, this group of lifers, these strippers who are getting a little long in the tooth, they're getting into their 40s. They're kind of just in the background in the first movie, and they all take center stage in this, which is basically a road trip movie. I don't know if you have like a favorite, moment or sequence in it, because there's so many.
I teared up on the part when Donald Glover, he does like this little song about a girl who's in the audience, and she just gives him like very, basic information about herself that he can kind of write a rap, a ditty about. And he just kind of speaks to her. Like, I feel like he reaches her, not just in like, it's partly because, they want everyone to feel special and like a queen and like, elevated and worshipped is what Jada says. But there's something deeper going on that Donald Glover kind of alludes to later, which is that women, but I mean, I think this applies to everyone, want someone to listen to them. Like when they speak, they want to be heard. And that to listen to someone is one of the most impactful kindnesses that anyone can do. And it seems very, like you said, it seems simple, but it's so moving to hear because it kind of reaches you in a deep place. We're like, why am I crying right now? It's like, wow, why does this feel special? This should be happening all the time. Like it should feel good. It should feel ordinary to see non-toxic masculinity on screen and seeing guys treat women with respect, but it isn't. It feels actually unusual, which is sad, but that's a whole other thing. But I'm just saying you're right. That moment to me really spoke to me because it's something that we can all do for each other that doesn't cost us anything, but we just forget.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I totally agree about that scene moving me too. And even another one when they are staying with this at this house with Andie MacDowell and her friends, and another one sings the song "Heaven" to one of the ladies there who is remembering, better times like with her husband. And it's also casual. This is not like preachy. And even though this is such a progressive movie, almost in like a radical way, but it's all there just kind of casually under the surface. It doesn't seem like it's trying to be woke or anything. But at the same time, it is so liberating. And like you said, it really points out what a unique thing this is and how sorely lacking we've been in having entertainment like this. And in that way, this really feels like a sex work positive movie in the sense that this isn't explicitly sex work, but it's at least adjacent in that that's the way that they're presenting this service to people. And there's a part where Donald Glover is speaking, I think with Channing Tatum, and they basically say that we're healers. That's ultimately what we're doing. And I think that when it comes to whether it's, stripping or performing or even doing sex work, there's a reason a lot of those things are needed for certain people, and that it's more than just about the satisfaction in a sexual way. There is something healing about it and tender about it. And I think that you can get all of that from this movie without it putting too fine a point on it. And it is super entertaining and fun. You get to see these great performances, especially the climax is like every member gets their own little solo showcase, and it ends with this awesome like mirror routine that Channing Tatum does with another dancer that kind of involves his romantic interest in a way that I think salvages that a little bit. And it's just a blast. To me, this movie's a miracle that it exists and that it is so great and that there's nothing else like it.
And that it sort of also touches on, oddly enough, like authenticity, being true to yourself. The whole bit about like Joe not wanting to be a fireman. Like they're also touching on like, who are you? Like it's like do what you love, sort of a message. Like be who you are, do what you love comes in a kind of like unexpected way as well. And it just has so much honesty and earnestness to it that you can't help but like root for these people and feel kind of challenge yourself to make, if you're a person who wants to make art or you're a person who wants to create something, to be honest about who you are, because otherwise it's not going to feel real, whether it's stripping or something else.
Totally agree. If there's one movie on this whole list that I can try to turn people towards that they might not have given a chance, I hope it's this one.
Magic Mike XXL.
XXL.
HBO Max. Check it out, guys. We are both highly united on this front. Okay, now the top two we've arrived at. I'm really excited about these.
I really do think these next two are the two best sequels.
Okay, so with that, we have number 2, Star Wars: The Empire Strikes Back. I almost wish I could play the music right now, but
Get
yes,
added
yeah. No, I
in.
won't get sued. So tell us what you like so much about this one. And are you actually a Star Wars person, or is this just something that you feel like is superior, but you're not like in the entire obsession with the universe at large?
I am not a Star Wars guy. And I think that's maybe the biggest compliment that I can give this movie is that I feel like I can come to this from a more objective place. I really have no nostalgia for Star Wars at all. Somehow I just missed the whole thing when I was a kid. I just wasn't into space stuff. For me, it was like the Tim Burton Batman movies and horror movies. Like those are the ones that I have nostalgia for. Going back through, and I'm sure I saw the Star Wars movies at some point along the way, but I never really like sat down with them and approached them in a serious way until I was like a teenager or a little bit older than that. Um, so I think that does make it stand out even more. That this is a movie you can get something out of and have a blast with, whether or not you're obsessed with Star Wars. And that it holds up today so much just in terms of a summer blockbuster, which I would really point to this as the point where the summer blockbuster really came of age. There were movies like Jaws, um, Raiders of the Lost Ark, the original Star Wars that get the credit for setting the template, for these big summer movies, which is, nowadays is just all we get all year round from all, the major studios. But this one, they focus so much on building up anticipation for this as a sequel. And I think that's so much of what our current, climate has been based on is in, properties and sequels and remakes and drawing people in to see their favorite characters again and try to keep them coming back for more. And I think those are major elements of Empire Strikes Back because this is like a middle movie. And I feel like today that can be a bad thing, that it's like every movie, all these superhero movies, everything is trying to be a middle film. And on the bad side of that, it kind of removes the stakes from it. You never feel like there's a single self-contained story being told with a beginning, middle, and end that's satisfying, that everything's there just to get you to buy the next product, watch the next TV show. And that stuff does drive me crazy. I think it's almost like if anything is coming close to like ruining mainstream cinema, that's kind of what it is right now. And this does all of that stuff, but it just works perfectly all the way through, that it actually fulfills the promise of the first movie and sets up expectations for the next one that are so high that they ultimately, I don't think, could or did live up to it. But just for this one moment, we got this movie that is just constant forward motion, that there's like no lulls in it.
And they didn't know at that time, like, that it was going to be as successful as it was, too. I mean, part of the reason I think you have a point now, how it feels is so different because there have been so many. Whereas then it was just, okay, how do we make it, how do we follow up A New Hope? But that was the only thing that existed. Like, can you imagine if now when they made a show, it wasn't like there was all this massive amounts of content to follow up with. It was just A New Hope. Okay, but I mean, that was a great success. So it's not like there wasn't pressure. But yeah, I'm sure that there was just such a difference since then. And I believe also this is the only one that George Lucas doesn't have a screenwriting credit on.
I wonder if that's significant.
Just a minor detail, doesn't have anything to do with anything.
So I want to give George Lucas credit for the original does set up a very solid foundation that is followed up on here. And, we have the classic John Williams score, the casting that has become iconic as well. And just the whole world that he sets up, was fertile enough to keep building on. I do like the original. There is a certain amount of hokiness to it. The pacing is pretty lumpy, especially the last 20 minutes. I always just get restless during it. Turns into this kind of video game, I don't know, with the Luke in a. There's so much terminology I'm not going to know that's going to probably upset Star Wars fans, but he's in his little space plane and shooting at people, and destroying the Death Star.
His little space plane.
Yeah, his little space plane, and so there's things there that are a little awkward, and it really feels like with him handing over the direction to Irvin Kershner and not having a writing credit on it, everything just snaps into place. Like the dialogue is snappier and the pacing especially just zips along in this movie. Every transition, like every set piece, this is a really brilliantly structured movie. And this is like the best possible argument for more is more. Like we get more of everything. We get deeper into the world. The dramatic stakes are higher. There's more of this resonance between, Luke training to be a Jedi to Darth Vader trying to, turn him over to the dark side. And of course, the big revelation at the end that it seems is so much more like full bodied. And while at the same time, it's just constant excitement going from escaping an asteroid field to the ice planet. And now he's with Yoda. And now he's got to leave to go rescue his friends. And as soon as we meet Lando, he does this heel turn into betraying them. And then right away, he's trying to help them again in his own way.
Yep.
It's just like one thing after another, just coming and coming. You can see how it maintains that excitement for the whole movie. How could you not get swept up in it?
And I think that tonally, too, it's also just darker. Like it's deeper, darker territory, too, than the fun lightheartedness of A New Hope.
Absolutely. And you have that added romantic tension that's there all of a sudden between Princess Leia and Han Solo, which, there's always something there to latch on to that's going on. The relationships are so much more developed and we get great new characters. It would be everything that anyone could have hoped for in a sequel. And even when it leaves us on like a cliffhanger at the end, it doesn't feel like a cop-out or like things are left unresolved. It feels like a dramatically satisfying whole while really getting you geared up to see the next installment.
Empire Strikes Back, better than A New Hope, and in the humble opinion of Mark and I, and is on Disney Plus, but it is not the original version, which I think, Mark, you said that you were able to find, right? The original without the CGI tampering.
Yeah. They're pretty easy to find if you know where to look. And I use this just as an opportunity because I haven't done that probably since I've been an adult. So it was definitely interesting. And Empire Strikes Back is probably the least affected by all of the tampering of the original three. I think A New Hope and Return of the Jedi are much like more unfortunate victims of the stuff that was added to those. So at least for those, I would definitely recommend trying to find them out. They're not, they don't look quite as good as far as like being in 4K, but they look pretty decent and they're better movies.
But this one is the least offender, as Mark said. So that is on Disney Plus in 4K restoration in all its glory. And then we have arrived at another one that's also on Disney Plus.
Yeah, it is. Untinkered with.
Yeah. Mark, tell us your number one favorite sequel of all time.
My favorite sequel of all time is 1999's Toy Story 2.
Yes. And tell us what you like about it the most, because this is out of 4 choices, not just 2.
That's true. And we'll talk about those. But I want to start out by saying that I also think that this has the best part 1 of the bunch that we've talked about. I recently rewatched that before revisiting Toy Story 2, and I was really taken aback by almost how much we take that movie for granted because, Toy Story was Pixar's first movie, the first computer animated feature-length film, and I really do think that it stands as a classic now because, it's definitely Pixar's most valuable, IP. It's like their Mickey Mouse now, where you see Woody and Buzz on everything, and it can be kind of easy to forget that this was just a self-contained movie at first. And it's like a perfectly constructed film, and I think that it lays the groundwork for things to be expanded on, even better than, for example, the original Star Wars. But it just stands alone as this just perfectly structured, very funny, very clever, very exciting, and moving family film. I think it's the best thing you could look for in terms of a family film. And the part 2 was actually made just one film later. The only movie between those for Pixar was A Bug's Life, which is one of the few Pixar movies that hasn't been, sequelized or spun off, kind of tellingly. So I think that Toy Story 2 was kind of their chance to put the stake in the ground and be like, all right, this, are we going to kick off a golden age, which is what actually happened, or are things going to kind of sputter down? Because this started out as like a direct-to-video sequel until they decided that they were going to expand it to make it like theatrical. So for a while there, Pixar really seemed like they could do no wrong. They were going from movie to movie, and it was like this guarantee of quality going from, Monsters, Inc. to The Incredibles to Finding Nemo, and eventually to really sophisticated films like WALL-E and Up and Ratatouille.
Inside Out.
Yeah, Inside Out. And that's probably the most recent one that I think comes close to that, golden age standard. And I think Toy Story 2 is the peak of it because it's taking what was already excellent in the first movie, and like the best sequels, it expands the world outwards. It deepens the themes of the original. It's even more fun, I think, more profound, and it just immediately starts opening everything up. This is actually the only other film that was directed by the same director as the original, John Lasseter. Who unfortunate things have come out about him in his workplace at Pixar, but he shepherded these first 2 movies. And I mean, right from the beginning, we start out with seeing this Buzz Lightyear video game that the toys play, and that is threaded brilliantly throughout the film in different ways that it pays off. We get to see this yard sale happening, which obviously would be a thing for toys. That would be a huge deal. And we have... Woody is stolen by this scheming toy collector, and we get this whole backstory about Woody's origins, that he was from this old time show, and we get to see all of these clips that are like lovingly recreated of this like old marionette show that
Woody's
are just brilliantly done. Yeah. And we meet Jessie, who would be a new character, voiced by Joan Cusack, who would last throughout the rest of the series, but she starts out as being part of this set that is going to go back into storage if they don't have a Woody to go out and put them into a museum. So, the first movie does have this whole existential crisis for Woody and Buzz. We have Woody, who is feeling devalued and like he's going to be replaced by Buzz as as the favorite toy. And then we have Buzz, who thinks that he's a real spaceman and coming to grips with being a toy. And those are pretty clever arcs, and the first movie handles them very well. And this movie manages to go even deeper with that, with basically the recognition that, as they say early in the movie, toys don't last forever. And Woody's dilemma in this really drives that home in a way that I always find kind of bracing about how frank and honest it is, where he has this choice basically between going to the museum and in a way that giving him immortality, or really just this safe, sterile life, because he knows that he can be appreciated at the cost of not being loved or loving. And if he chooses to take this meaningful life of going back to being a toy, and he decides to invest himself in this and to love, that he's eventually going to be put away, and that the Andy is going to grow up, that this loss isn't just a possibility, it's a certainty. And the movie gives us no reassurance that this isn't the best option. Because one of the most famous scenes is this flashback that Jessie has set to a Sarah McLachlan song, written by Randy Newman, actually, who wrote all the songs for the original one, but he just wrote this and the Woody's Roundup theme for this film. And, basically that's showing her, being loved and then eventually discarded by her owner. And there's no resolution at the end of that. And just that sequence alone, Pixar would come to be known for these devastating sequences, like, the opening of Up.
The montages.
Yes.
Yeah.
Inside Out has some real tear-jerking stuff in it.
Yeah.
And this was like the first, and in my opinion, the best of those kind of things happening. And you can read so much into this, whether it's about, the fear of abandonment. It could be about parenting and knowing that one day your child is going to leave you in one way or another. It could be about you growing up yourself, or the bravery of going into a new relationship, knowing that there's a good chance that it's going to end in pain, or just death, because it really is about the inevitability that this is something you can't get away from. And that's really the best that any of us could hope for out of life, is that we take the risk to love and to live a life that's something. And best case scenario, it's going to end in pain. And this is a kids movie.
It's. I was about to say, and this is for children, but as usual, Pixar is also for adults. And there's a lot of jokes. I was thinking of that when I was rewatching it for this episode, was all the tour guide Barbie stuff. And there's so many jokes. It's like, this is clearly for us. This is like these jokes of like, oh, some marketers were short-sighted when they didn't make enough Buzz Lightyear toys, initially, or whatever she says about like that they didn't know how famous Toy Story would be. And it's like, okay, so there's so many nods to like a more mature audience. So it makes it enjoyable for children and adults. So like you said, it becomes a lot more meaningful, surprisingly. And then you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't come here to weep.
Right. And every animated kids film since the first Toy Story has been trying to hit that balance of it's funny and exciting for kids, it's funny and meaningful for adults. And on one hand, you end up with a bunch of Shrek movies where it's all about like pop culture references and lots of glib, easy, or inappropriate jokes. And everything in these Toy Story movies is like character based. The humor comes out of the situation and how these characters, whether they're toys or humans, actually think and behave. And they're really brilliantly written movies. And this whole setting of the toy store, this whole other side of the movie is this rescue mission with Buzz and the gang. And you get to see this whole new dynamic with them. You get this great setting with the Barbies. And I love how Buzz, who spends the whole first movie with Woody having to humor him that he's real and can't convince him that he's a toy, meets another Buzz that he has to deal with now who won't accept that he's a toy. Like, that's just great writing.
Yes.
And an Emperor Zurg toy then it becomes someone who's complicating things and chasing them around. Buzz actually gets replaced by the other Buzz, unknowingly to the other toys. This is like prime comedy.
Yeah, it's like, what does he say? He's like, oh, this is a 386 or 186. And he's like, you mean he's, oh yeah. He's like, Your Majesty.
Yeah.
Where it's like Buzz knows delusional Buzz. Like he knows how he would talk to his old self is hilarious. And then he also has that line in that exact same scene where he's like, you are a toy to Woody. So there's a lot of, it's like callbacks, but being like very clever with them. And you're not just repeating yourself, you're like doing it in a creative way that
it feels like it's really paying something off.
Exactly. And it's moving the story forward. It isn't just gratuitous like, oh, we know how much you loved the first one, here you go. It's not like trying to placate you. It's really clever and it fits within what they're saying.
It's bigger and in scale and everything in a typical sequel way, but it's still exciting and even more meaningful. The way that it can balance that melancholy and that you can't quite shake it afterwards, while at the same time it is such a exhilaratingly fun entertainment. I think that makes it the best candidate for the best sequel. It's
yes,
a blast.
and it's so much fun. And it's so much fun. I love the scene with the not the pine cones, the orange cones, and the Owl's Toy Barn stuff. It's got that the guy who plays in Jurassic Park and, Norman from Seinfeld.
Oh, yeah, Wayne Knight.
Yeah, that's got a great Jurassic Park character vibe. I think he even wears like a similar shirt that he wore on Jurassic Park because they're both scheming to kind of, overtake the system. So Toy Story 2, I would be surprised if any of you have not watched this, but this is another one I'm going to include with Empire Strikes Back where it's like, these deserve some rewatches. If you're not sure what to watch tonight, remember that these are great movies and they'll give you joy. So with that, we're going to end this episode with my Inside the Actor Studio inspired questionnaire. I do not know Mark's answers to these questions. I'm so excited. This might be...
Buckle up.
I literally just invented this podcast for this segment, There's people's top fives, but then there's like these fun little things. So I'm going to go in. Yeah, the first question is, what is the most underrated movie?
Now, there are so many choices that I could go for with this and a lot of highbrow choices, but I wanted to go for something that maybe would be really surprising because it is not something that you would really expect for this. So, and again, this is kind of a random thing that I could have chosen a lot of things for this, but
yes.
I was shocked at how much I liked the Farrelly Brothers Three Stooges movie. That's exactly the face I was expecting. A lot of people haven't seen this movie or wrote it off like I did when it came out.
Mark, I didn't even know it existed. What is it?
Oh, yeah. It's a Three Stooges movie that, again, was made by the Farrelly Brothers. It came out in, 2012. And it basically, it has Chris DiMatopoulos, Sean Hayes, and Will Sasso as Mo, Larry, and Curly. And it actually, captures the spirit of the old Three Stooges shorts and has some really impressive choreography and, strangely enough, editing of almost effects in it that actually you can tell that the filmmakers have a real fondness for these old comedy shorts, and the way that they recreate it, and maybe it's just because I saw a lot of it growing up. My dad was a big Three Stooges guy. That they actually do a pretty amazing job of recreating the sense of humor and the style of these. What an incredible
answer. I think you are on an island alone with this take, and I really appreciate it because not only have I not seen it, I didn't know that it existed. So that is the mark of true underratedness.
I would love to get your take on this.
Okay, I'll have to put it on my watch list now. Three Stooges by the Farrelly Brothers. Wow. Okay, Mark. Bringing out the big guns.
Where can we go from here?
Yeah. Okay, number 2. What is your happiest movie experience?
Okay, well, I did a lot of trashing of, Marvel movies and superhero movies when we were talking about Empire Strikes Back, and I am definitely very fatigued by them and really have kind of hit my limit. But there was a time when The Dark Knight came out years ago that actually is another one that's kind of a runner-up, really, that could be somewhere on this list as well.
Yes.
And because I do think it's better than the original, and it's quite a good movie on its own, but it's hard to go back to that time mentally to where superhero movies still had not taken over everything, and the Batman Begins was really cool and promising, and going and seeing The Dark Knight on opening night with a rapt audience, who really, all the stuff that's kind of descended into cliche now was still unexpected at the time, and everyone had known for at least a month, maybe longer, that Heath Ledger had died. So everyone in that theater knew that this was his last performance, captured on film. And obviously it's a great iconic performance, and seeing him walking in, for the first time, and you could just feel the chill go through the theater of like, oh my God, this is great. I've never seen anything like this before. And we all know he's gone already, which was really quite a communal experience. And then the rest of the movie being so exciting on top of that. And so ambitious and serious in a way that, again, now it seems like tiresome in the way that every Batman movie since then has tried to capture that same tone. And but I'll definitely never forget seeing it for the first time personally and being with all these people who I've just never seen an audience so intent about what was going on screen. And that's the best, example I can think of.
I love that answer, and I love how you managed to include another sequel into this segment.
I know, right? That was not intentional.
Yeah, I know. Brilliant. And I agree. I think I saw The Dark Knight 5 times in the theater, and I loved it. Like
I bet I did too.
I could not get enough of that movie. It was just excellent on so many levels. Okay, so 3, a movie that you changed your opinion on.
Now, this was tough, too, because, there's so many movies over the years that I have changed my opinion on. So I wanted to go more positive with this one, and that was with David Lynch's Eraserhead. Because that was a movie I always appreciated, but always struggled with the tone of it, of it seeming like, so much of it is silly, and then so much of it is foreboding. And I don't know, it just took one night when I popped it on in the right time and, on a big TV with the sound cranked up and the lights all out, and it totally immersed and overwhelmed me. And I thought I found it the equal parts hilarious and disturbing and frightening, and even strangely meaningful in a subconscious way about fears of parenthood. And it was just a really great feeling to feel everything click into place and say, you know what, I think I'm watching a masterpiece right now, and I'm finally like on its wavelength.
That makes sense. Yeah, and especially the volume part of that, because a lot of the praise for Eraserhead is around the musical aspects of it that Lynch did himself. So I think that's a big plus, because I also did not watch it very loud, and my friend Joel did, and he said he was completely lost in it. He was completely immersed, like you said. Mm-hmm. So that's a perfect way to watch that film too.
Yeah, I think that made all the difference.
Interesting. Good take. Okay, number 4, my favorite question. An actor you find undeniably sexy.
This was tough too.
Magic Mike.
But... yeah, no, nobody from Magic Mike
sadly,
in there, although wonderful physiques in that film.
Yeah.
And
they're all right.
Physical feats. Yeah. I think that when I thought about it, I'm going to go with Steven Yeun.
Wow.
Who I pretty much only know him from the film Burning. I know that he was on The Walking Dead for many years, which I never watched.
Glenn.
And... yeah, and Minari, I guess, was something that either he won an award for it or that movie won an award. I don't totally remember because I missed the movie. But in Burning, he's selected to be this kind of Jude Law type character, who's another person I was considering actually, who seems to be in movies like Talented Mr. Ripley, where he's always kind of the Gatsby like rich character
Alfie.
Who somebody else, who somebody else is projecting all of their, desires and inadequacies onto, because he is just so smooth and comfortable in his own skin and beautiful.
Yeah.
And Steven Yeun kind of has that role in the film Burning. And he was just so perfectly cast, pulls off that same thing. And let's just say he's a fresher face than Jude Law is at the moment.
Okay, so last question. If you were to die and come back as a movie character, who would you choose?
All right, my answer for this, there's lots of great answers for this, but the one I settled on is Ed Wood by way of Johnny Depp in Tim Burton's Ed Wood.
Wow.
And I think it's because he has the right idea about life. That he is not talented as a filmmaker, but he is passionate about it, and nothing stops him from pursuing that. And he amasses this whole gang of misfits to go along with him along the way. And it truly is not about being great as opposed to just doing what you love despite everything. And it's a very stylized performance. He's, very chipper, and nothing will get him down. And his whole approach to life, I think you could find something kind of profound in. And there's a little part where he gets depressed towards the end of the movie, but he comes out of it pretty quickly. And his whole spirit, and especially that scene where he's on the phone with some movie executive, and he's like, well, what'd you think of the picture? Right. Worst thing you've ever seen. Worst thing that's ever been released in theaters. All right, well, the next one will be better.
It's just tremendous optimism and positivity.
Yeah, the next one will be better. And that's life, isn't it?
I'm surprised. I thought maybe because I know how much you love Pee-wee's Big Adventure, I thought maybe that you'd pick him.
That was my choice before I thought of this.
Was it really?
You know me. It really was. Yeah.
All right, folks.
Something about Tim Burton characters, I guess.
I was about to say.
Not the tragic ones.
Part of the reason that, I've been trying to be slightly topical with my wardrobe in my episodes, but part of the reason I wore the shirt is because it reminded me of Tim Burton, and I know that Mark enjoys Tim Burton. So
early Tim Burton films.
Let's please not discuss Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and Alice in Wonderland. We'll pretend that it just is like Edward Scissorhands and Pee-wee's Big Adventure and Ed Wood when he was a little more artsy.
I'm with him maybe through like Mars Attacks, maybe.
Oh wow, you're along for the ride.
Oh, there's a lot after that.
Okay, those are superb answers, Mark, and I think they're great. And are just to recap so that you guys know what to watch. The top 5 with Marc Dottavio are. Hold on. Pause. Let me make sure I say them in the correct order. French Connection 2. Then we have Mad Max Fury Road, Magic Mike XXL, The Empire Strikes Back, and ending with Toy Story 2. Check them out.
2.
Watch this list, and we will see you at the movies.